Good evening, dear viewers. We are about to start our third episode on Meetup program. Today's topic, as you can see, is challenging the authenticity or infallibility of Hadith collection. What do we understand to be Hadiths? Not to bore you with detailed academic definition of Hadiths, I will tell you in short, Hadiths are supposedly collections of the sayings, deeds, and approvals of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. There are many ways to discuss this issue, but I'm going to focus particularly on the question of whether the Hadith collections are reliable. Muslim scholars throughout the centuries have endeavored to make us believe and accept that at least the 6 so-called most reliable Hadith collections are authentic. I have been doing intensive research on Islamic historiography and theology for many decades, since I was a child. I have no doubt in my mind that we have been lied, we have been deceived by our forefathers. At times, they were deceived themselves. And now, when I have been researching with a neutral mind, I have come to the conclusion that all these hadiths are baseless. All of them. Absolutely all of them. Why? For many reasons. Some scholars will tell you that some of the hadiths are still questionable, although they were graded to be sahih, or authentic, or reliable. Even I was in a position that 90% of the hadiths are wrong, baseless. But recently, I have come to the conclusion that absolutely all of them are baseless. Some will argue, whilst rejecting hadith collections, that Quran tells us to rely on Quran only as divine guidance. So, to rely on hadith collections goes against the Quranic teaching. And many Islamic scholars have named such scholars who rely on Quran only to be the Quranists. I'm not going to base my argument on that, but I will try to base my argument from the point of view that the hadith collections, the efforts and the results and the outcomes do not match up. If I was the head of a fact-finding mission, empowered by some more scholars, to find out whether these hadiths bear any kind of academic excellence, my findings would have been none whatsoever. All these hadith collections are misleading, contradicting, and sometimes barbaric. We need to get rid of these hadiths from our society as a whole, let alone from the Islamic theology. All these hadiths are unfounded. Let's look at the issues, without going into details, into academic discussions to bore you. What you can do your own investigations and find out whether I am saying something which doesn't make sense. I will tell you one name, Abu Huraira. Another name, Aisha. Sunni collection effort for hadiths dates back before the Shia effort to collect hadiths. So these two names are the most important names in hadith collection history, in hadith narration history, Aisha and Abu Huraira. Aisha and Abu Huraira are the two most important characters in Islamic history. If you don't have Aisha, if you don't have Abu Huraira, you do not have Sunni hadith collection. Period. Aisha, the wife of Muhammad, was not named in Quran. The history of Aisha is blurred in Islamic history. There are so many contradictory reports about what eventually happened to her. The Shias will tell you that they don't like Aisha that much. Some will go far enough to say that Aisha was involved in the murder of Muhammad himself. But at least most, if not all, of the Shia scholars will tell you they do not like Aisha. What does the Quran say? The Quran has few so-called references to Aisha and to another wife of Muhammad, Hafsa, who were strongly rebuked by Allah in Quran, because it is clear from the Quran that they were giving hard times to Muhammad. Now, how they were giving the hard times, why they were giving the hard times, whether giving those hard times were justifiable, Islamic critics or critics of Islam will give you sometimes contradictory, variant information, which, let alone, doesn't challenge the issue that they were giving hard times to the Prophet of Islam. They were even warned by Allah that being the wife of Muhammad automatically didn't guarantee heaven. They were reminded, warned of what happened to the wife of Lot. So there's not a single verse in the Quran to glorify Aisha. Some Sunni scholars will tell you that in an incident when allegedly Aisha lost her way, she lost her necklace and all that, and some companions of Muhammad were raising questions about her dedication to Muhammad. Allah had exonerated her of the charges and she was a chaste woman. But those verses even were not clear, categorically mentioning Aisha. Surah 33 rather warns the wives of Muhammad, specifically Aisha and Hafsa, not to engage in activities which would be considered lewd activities, fahisha activities. They were told not to engage in chit-chats with some of the companions of Muhammad who were lusting after Muhammad's wives. So if the Quran ends with a warning for Aisha and Hafsa, why should I have to give Aisha such a priority in Hadith collections when there's not a single, clear, unequivocal, explicit verse praising Aisha? Rather, it seems that her devotion to Islam was questionable. There are hadiths, for example, which will glorify Khadija and mother of Jesus. But you will also find hadiths praising Aisha, that Muhammad had loved her the most. But if Muhammad had loved her most, how come she was not mentioned amongst the 4 most respectable women in Islam by any hadiths? How come Aisha explicitly went against Quranic instructions to engage in the battle of Jamal? So someone who gave hard times to Muhammad for sure, as per Quran, someone who for sure violated Quranic instructions and went into battlefield, I have to give value to the hadiths of Aisha. At least, instead of insulting her, at least for the sake of Ummah, I should not accept hadiths from her, for the safe side. What if, like, I'm questioned hereafter about the reason I had accepted Aisha's hadiths? Moreover, we get all these hadiths from, allegedly narrated by Aisha, from a couple of names. One of them was Ibn Shihab. Ibn Shihab was a scholar who was empowered to collect the so-called narrations of hadiths from Aisha. But Ibn Hisham himself was a paid scholar by the Umayyad Caliph who had engaged in slaughtering the members of Muhammad's household. So how can we accept or rely even on the so-called hadith narrations by Aisha? I'm not a hypocrite. I will not concoct excuses. I will not engage in mental gymnastics to justify my action of accepting hadiths. Or I don't care if somebody tells me that I become a Shia for rejecting hadith narrations by Aisha. Now coming to Abu Huraira, the father of kitten. No Abu Huraira, no Munabe, no 27,000 Sunni hadiths. So Abu Huraira, how long did he stay with Muhammad? How was his character? we find contradicting stories. But the most authentic ones tell me that he was not a very honest man. And Umar was very disturbed by his prolific hadith narrations. This man would go left and right to narrate hadiths, and sometimes he would even contradict himself. But what struck me was the fact that we don't know the actual name of Abu Huraira. Qazi Nazrul Islam is the national poet of Bangladesh. We call him the rebel poet. Imagine quoting poetries from him, calling him the rebel poet, and not knowing his name. There are 15 at least variant names of Abu Huraira. How come we are narrating so many hadiths into details, but we don't know his name even? My question rather, as we do not know exactly where he came from, how long did he stay with the Prophet? What was his real name? And we have all these variant explanations. And we are even questioning, his character is even questionable. He was not even an educated man, went on to teach scholars hadiths. Astonishing. Simply fact that he said from his own words that Muhammad had blessed him and he would never forget anything again. It's like he's the witness of his own credibility. Sorry, rejected. I do not find Abu Huraira to be reliable, even if he existed. But I believe Abu Huraira never even existed. What about Aisha then? Going back to the Aisha issue. As I said, Quran doesn't mention Aisha by name. But I was shocked when I turned the pages of Bible, where I read in the Genesis chapter, excuse me, that Ishmael had two wives. One was Fatima and the other was Aisha. I was shocked. It is quite preposterous of me. It would be quite preposterous of me to expect that coincidentally Muhammad had a daughter, Fatima, and a wife of almost the same age, Aisha. Doesn't make sense. So I believe, let the future be my witness, Aisha did not exist either. Did not even exist, my dear friends. Now, one of the earliest so-called hadith collections was Muwatta. What do we have of Muwatta, of the first 300 years of Islam? Just one single sentence in existence before the 9th century. Just one single sentence in manuscript. Just one single sentence. Where is it? Even that is not in the Muslim world. Even that copy is preserved in Vienna, in a museum in Austria. And there are over 30 variant copies of the Muwatta. One of them is so-called most accepted one of the Iyahya version. So do you honestly want me to accept Muwatta to be reliable? Now coming to the main issue of accepting the 6 canonical hadiths: Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmizi, Nasai, Abu Dawud, Ibn Majah. Let's take a look. Bukhari was the son of a so-called great scholar who never saw his dad grow. He was an infant when his father had died. And it is said that he was born in an area dominated by Zoroastrians, Buddhists, and all that. But nevertheless, allegedly he had traveled to Mecca and Medina for 16 years and has started collecting hadiths. He was a teenager when he first started writing biographies of so-called hadith narrators. And he, being born in 810, had started writing, collection of his hadiths in 842 and allegedly finished in 845. Some scholars will tell you that he took over 16 years to write it and went on writing and refreshing his hadiths until his death. My question is simple. As I said, I don't want to bore you with nitty-bitty details of academic structure, but still, it is said that he had deciphered hundreds of thousands of hadiths to bring it down to just over 3,000. And every time when he was examining in a hadith, he would perform his ablution, he would do 2 rakah of prayer, and then he will decipher the hadiths and he will examine and he will decide to accept or reject. I have calculated that he had spent 12 years at least doing ablution and doing prayer whilst examining the hadiths. 12 years just to do ablutions and prayers. So when did he have the time to do other prayers, to do wazifa, and to examine the hadiths? This is extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which I don't have. And now coming to the issue of whether all his efforts was infallible. He was instructed by his guru, his teacher, Ishaq ibn Wa'il, to write down these hadith collections, who was a paid scholar by the Abbasids. The Abbasids who were engaged into serious infights during that time, and they were lashing out against the scholars. Abu Hanifa was allegedly murdered by the Abbasids by poisoning because he was a rational thinker, didn't bow to the Caliph al-Mansur. Then Zafar al-Sadiq, scholar, again, great-grandson of the Prophet, was lashed by the Caliph. Was forced to walk by the Caliph. Then Ahmad ibn Hanbal was lashed by the Caliph. So they're not very friendly with the people who are scholars who didn't agree with the Caliph. But the question is, how come Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Nasai, Abu Dawud, Ibn Majah were never challenged by the authorities? Then a scholar who is not persecuted in any way or harassed by any means by the ruling power, at a time when the greatest scholars were being bamboozled, were being tortured, abused, makes me accept all this with a pinch of salt. And Bukhari, there is no evidence that he ever respected Abu Hanifa, another great jurist. So I see serious problems with the hadith collectors and the greatest jurists. I see a serious problem. Who should be the greatest scholars? The collectors or the jurists? To my understanding, the jurists should be getting more respect. But Bukhari's teachers, including Saqib and Ruwaya did not respect Abu Hanifa. They were rather very vocal in insulting Abu Hanifa. Bukhari went on to claim that he had only collected Sahih, the reliable one, authentic ones, in his hadith collections. But his hadith collections are full of contradictions, full of issues which are definitely insulting against the Prophet. Definitely. If anyone, any Western man wrote down any such a story, the Islamists would have become mad to take his life, let alone killing someone for drawing a cartoon. For example, if you write Hadith 5255 of the Bukhari, you'll feel that Bukhari is suggesting a story where Muhammad allegedly tried to rape someone. There are stories of gang rapes. You may say, wow, how dare you use such words against our Prophet? I don't. I'm not doing it. Trust me, I'm not the one who's telling you all this. Bukhari is depicting such stories in his hadith collection. It's not me. Don't kill the messenger. It's not me. It's Bukhari. You say, may Allah's blessings be upon him. Bukhari. The very Bukhari who depicted stories where Muslim soldiers had imprisoned women from the kuffar, and they were engaged in having unprotected sex with them. And they were asking the Prophet whether they will ejaculate inside the woman or outside, because they have plans to sell them off later. Disgusting hadiths like a companion of the Prophet would look out to see in which way the Prophet was facing when he was answering to nature's call. Hadiths depicting that Muhammad's followers were fighting over Muhammad's thread of hair. Barbaric descriptions as well, which I don't tend to explain here now. Bukhari was the man who said Muhammad had married and had sex with a child called Aisha. Yeah, she had married him married her at the age of 6 and had consummated the marriage at the age of 9. There are contradictions like how many times Muhammad used to wash his hands during ablution. In one place it's once, in one place it's twice, in another place it's thrice. And again, questions come like, how long did Muhammad stay in Mecca before migrating to Medina? In some places 10, in some places 13, in some places 11 or 12 or whatever. So how come all these can be sahih? How come all this can be true? If you praise all of this, then you don't have knowledge of any of this. There's no moral ground even. The so-called narrators of all these hadiths are questionable. There's a term called Tishatul Ashara. That means the 10 who are blessed by Allah guaranteed heaven. But the Quran doesn't guarantee heaven to anyone except a few by names. Allah is pleased with them. But how come we see alleged companions of Muhammad, one who had killed the other unjustifiably, and the other had succumbed to the death, to the murder. So the murderer and the murdered both were guaranteed heavens in the Tishatul Ashara list. I find that preposterous again. I reject that. There are hadith narrators who had clearly, Islamic history says, mental problems. For example, Imran ibn Hussein. There are hadith narrators who had variant versions of Usman's Quran in their possession. There are narrators who had killed prophets great-grandchildren and grandchildren. For example, Muawiyah, who never erected a single mosque during his lifetime of 39 years rule of Syria, who had crosses in his coins. I can't accept this. How come there is always a heavy reliance on children as hadith narrators, who were children during the lifetime of Muhammad? Even Abbas, he was a child when Muhammad had died. Abu Huraira, he was hardly a companion of Muhammad, went to discuss the greatest number of hadiths ever. All this doesn't make sense to me. So the rest of the flock, they were all students of Bukhari. We don't even know whether the so-called Bukhari collection of Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari, was even written by Bukhari, because there is not a single copy of Bukhari until the 12th century. Until the 12th century. And where is that copy? In the British Library, my dear friends. In the British Library. So Bukhari allegedly dictated his Sahih collection to one guy called Farabri. We don't have any evidence of his intellectual acumen. We don't have any other writings of this so-called Farabri guy, who had allegedly,
where is that copy?
Who had allegedly dictated this Sahih Bukhari that he had heard twice from an old man then, Bukhari, almost 6 decades after Bukhari's death, to a young teenager. Allegedly, that's how we got Bukhari. Nasai was beaten to death for not showing respect to Muawiyah. The Muawiyah, who in fact is the godfather of all the extremist Islamic organizations today we see. All the extremist organizations, political fanatic Islamist groups respect Muawiyah, because he is the one who had initiated how to divide the Muslims by creating Jama'ah, Muslim Jama'ah within the Muslim society. And he was the one who was condemning Ali, the son-in-law, cousin of Muhammad, standing in Damascus mosques. Strange, you know. So Nasai was beaten to death. It proves that the scholars, these hadith collectors, were not free. How come the greatest of companions did not go to describe the highest number of hadiths? We have only a handful of hadith narrations from the most, so-called most reliable companions of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, Umar, Osman, Ali. We have only a handful of hadiths. And they will justify in telling you that they were engaged in running the country. Which was more important to them, running the country or giving the intellectual backup for the Muslim community? In fact, you will see most of these narrators, hadith narrators in the hadith collections were 7th category companions. They were either servants or unacceptable companions. Abdullah Omar is one of the another great number of hadith narrators. Abdul Omar
Justify in telling you that they were.
Now, please remain silent. Mute your setups. I have to remove your user.
In fact, you will see most of these narrators, hadith narrators in the hadith collections were 7.
It's quite disturbing. But as I said, that they went to discuss, Abdullah Omar went to discuss and narrate another great large number of hadiths, when Abdullah Omar himself was not respectful to his father, another great companion, so-called great companion of Muhammad, Omar. Someone who was not respectful to his father, went on to discuss and narrate great number of hadiths. Doesn't make sense. And Umar's future generations went on to serve the killers of Prophet's family, Umayyads. So another thing, all these efforts took place at a time which coincides with the establishment of Bait al-Hikmah. During the Bait al-Hikmah, scholars were engaged from different parts of the world, sometimes under the leadership and guidance of Jewish and Christian scholars, namely another Ishaq, not Ishaq the biographer, another Ishaq, to discuss the hadith narrations, Islamic theology, and all that. I find it quite uncomfortable. And the patronizers of these hadith collections, the caliphs, Abbasid caliphs, also patronized scholars, biographers like Ishaq, Ibn Ishaq. We don't know anything. We don't know anything about Ibn Ishaq's writings because all these writings, in fact, are not reliable. Ibn Ishaq biography of Muhammad is totally unreliable because Ibn Hisham, another guy in the future, he deciphered and took and examined and kept whatever he wanted to keep, threw away whatever he wanted to throw. But still, Ishaq was patronized by Al-Mansur. And he was not liked by the greatest scholars either. They all thought that he was a paid agent of the Jews and Christians. So I do not have any reasons to believe that hadiths are infallible. And also, aspects of chain, of so-called chain of narrators. Sometimes we end up relying only on one narrator, only on one narrator. And I have to accept that. So so-called mutawattir hadiths are only a handful. Even those mutawattir hadiths are questionable as well. So my question, dear friends, why should I accept hadiths when these are so staggeringly unreliable, though no reason whatsoever? Let alone the fact that even the Quran itself tells you not to rely on any other hadith other than the Quran itself, which requires another detailed academic discussion in future. I'm now open for questions if you have any. Go ahead. Yes.
I have a question. I have a question, brother.
Hang on. Zabir asked me a question first. So Zabir raised your hand. Yeah, go ahead.
So, thank you very much, sir, for your presentation. My question to you, as one of your student, what would you say to the mainstream Muslims who believes that one hadith or a single narration can be traced back to the time of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and without any doubt? So how can they begin their investigation or research in this matter?
All they need to do is examine the chains, and if a hadith was narrated by a single person, then we need to find out how old was he during the time of Muhammad, what was his character, how much do you know about him, etc. And to do an independent effort to find the details like I did. And if it ends up with Abu Huraira and Aisha, I would reject it. And you will find that to be the case in most of the hadith collections. So they can't really prove their point. Can't do it. And most of the hadiths are also against the Quranic theme. For example, circumcision. The Quran tells you not to alter your body. But sometimes we will see that people are emphasizing and calling it at least an wajib. Sometimes they will call it mustahab. Do it. Prophet did it. Doesn't make sense. Even if Prophet was circumcised, he was circumcised before the age of 40. So that can't be a sunnah for me. And it's also, Quran says, do not alter your ears and body. You don't change them. How come I'm changing it? stupid logics like cutting your nail, but it automatically falls off. Your hair, you tidy it up. You don't have any sense if you cut your hair. But it bleeds when you snip the tip of your penis. So it is changing irreversibly. So you will see many of the Judaic theological issues, finding their ways into hadiths. Hadiths like Eve was created from the ribs of Adam, which is not in the Quran. So that's why they need to engage their theological knowledge based on Quran, Islamic jurisprudence with a neutral mind, and then go into the details and biographies of the so-called narrators and find the contradictions. Piece of cake. Thank you. Yeah, Rana Babu, go ahead.
Thank you, brother. I'm saying that most of the Muslims still now believe hadiths are the authenticity of Quran and the clarification of Quran. What do you think?
If Quran requires hadith to explain itself, then Allah did a bad job. Sorry. Because Allah says that everything is clear in the Quran. It doesn't rely on any other scripture. It's self-sufficient, because if it is inspiration, an inspiration should be complete. But when you are explaining Quran from the viewpoint of hadiths, then you will see that Quran is not enough. If you're defining salah or prayer from what you understand from hadiths, then obviously you will say Quran is not enough. If you're explaining Hajj from the sense of hadiths, then you will say Quran is not enough. Then sometimes you will say even hadith is not enough, because even the hadiths are not comprehensive in telling you how to do the prayers 5 times. So Quran is not enough, hadith is not enough, tafsir not enough, Zakir Naik not enough, I am not enough. When will we be enough? When will we say we had enough? I think we had enough of nonsense. And these hadiths are also bogging us down in our civilizational progress, because I think that these hadiths are forcing us to view the society from the 6th century viewpoint, and we need to move on. This is suffocating Muslims, and that's why it should be rejected. Yes, Abdullah Roman. Abdullah Roman. Yes.
Sir.
Awesome.
My question is, recently I saw your show. You're talking about Quran. Quran is also, you doubted Quran is also written by man. So what is
This is an English session. You have to try to speak in English only. Sorry. So if I can make your question, the question is, you're trying to say that I said that even the Quran is man-made, and so if it is man-made, then what does Islam rely on? Is that the question?
Yes. So why should we talking about hadith? Is Quran is not
Authentic.
So why should we talking about hadith?
As a scholar, as a researcher, I will address everything. First of all, even the tafsirs, even the alphabets, even the Arabic language. But when I say Quran is man-made, I mean it's inspired. You can say inspired by God. But it was never, there's not a single verse in the Quran where it says an angel by the name of Jibreel or Gabriel came to Muhammad, dictated him the Quran. There's not a single verse in the Quran. So if you say it was inspired into heart, because the Quran says the meaning of the word Jibreel means power. So if Allah's power or God's power inspired in your heart, a prophet's heart, and Quran was delivered, I don't see any problem. But the effort of writing down is a human effort. It's a human effort. That's why you see errors in manuscripts. That's why you see printing mistakes. That's why you see some of the words not making sense, because I'm pretty sure there were errors in them when writing and collecting. It's a human effort. So there is not a single verse in the Quran to say a book by the name Quran will be preserved. No matter how human fails, Allah will not let it fail. It doesn't say that. Quran doesn't mean a book. So the words can't be, the words, if they're divine or spiritual, they can't be altered. But there's no guarantee that I will not make a mistake, because the scholars do make mistakes when writing down. They make mistakes. Always they make mistakes. So these mistakes are there. So that's why it's a human effort. But if you say it was divinely inspired, I don't see any problem, because even the Hadith would say this is inspiration. Right. Anything else? Ashush,
Yes,
yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I have a couple of questions regarding this matter. So first question is, should we prioritize those hadiths which has some weights based on the Quranic standards? This is my first question. The second question is, the hadith methodologies that has been utilized by the Islamic scholars at present days are enough to understand the authenticity of the hadith? This is number two. And yes.
Go ahead. Number three.
And number three is, as per the Sunni Muslims, that after Quran, this is the Sahih Bukhari that has been considered as the most authentic book to understand Islam. And some of the scholars are also very much interested to give prioritizing on hadith, because as per their statement, that we saw that to understand Quran as the verbatim words of Allah, it is important to understand hadith because it is the words from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So does it make sense or not?
It doesn't, because I'm not going to accept lies to be true. For example, I'm not bound to accept Bukhari to be authentic, because he was not a prophet either. There's no way I can guarantee his infallibility. He was a human being, if he ever existed. And also the questions I put forward as challenges to Bukhari's authenticity, if someone can't come up with a stronger argument to refute those arguments, then I will say that I'm right and Bukhari was wrong. And I don't have to respect Bukhari at all. If I die and I'm in front of Allah and Allah tells me, why did you not accept Bukhari? I'll just simply say I found him incredible. And I found his claims to be absolutely abhorring, disrespectful to the Prophet, barbaric, and sometimes baseless. So you didn't tell me to follow Bukhari, so I did not. So as far as research methodology is concerned by our so-called Islamic scholars, I find them, all of them who are relying on hadith, to be deceptive, liars. All of them are liars, because they are either not doing their job right or they are deceiving themselves. I have invited many Islamic scholars to come to debate with me on the issue, but thus far they have failed to turn up. For example, I even declared, 2 million takas to Abbasi to come and debate with me on the issue of hadith. He has rejected thus far, because he knows that if he engages in historiography, he will have no legs to stand on. So the matter is either true or false. If it is a false, it can't have a practical purpose to follow. So what is it? It's either true or false. The answer is false. And if I claim from a single source, half of it is true, half of it is false, then in fact I don't have knowledge of any of them. So I will say that this whole claim is baseless. I don't need hadiths. There's no reason for me to manifest my life basing around hadiths. And to understand the Prophet or his teachings, the only way you can do that is take Quran as something which gives you the stories of many prophets and tells you the stories as inspirations. You don't need to know how he used to eat. It doesn't make any sense. Eating dates instead of mango will not enhance my righteousness. I don't find any reason that I'm wearing a beard, which even Abu Zahl used to wear, if he ever existed, or even Abu Sufyan used to wear, who was a munafiq, I think. There's no reason for me, or Abu Lahab even, for that matter. It increases my my piety. But sometimes beard can be a mark of wisdom and devotion for someone who doesn't even have the time to shave off, like me. So I don't see any reason for me to kill my aesthetic minds. Absurd. For example, Hadith tells me things which Quran doesn't. Music is haram. This is haram. That is haram. Having water in a green bottle is haram. You know, these are all nonsense. So such nonsensical sources can't have any practical purpose whatsoever. Makes sense, I guess.
Yes. Sir,
Yes, Faisal, go ahead.
as you have said that you are a believer in 10% of hadith
Before.
but now you have said that 100% hadith are baseless.
Right.
My question is, what made you believe in 10% hadith before?
Because there are some great words in hadith. Some of the hadiths have beautiful teachings. And I would have loved to find that those hadiths had some sort of pedestal basis in some authentic sources. But some words are great. You know, at-tuhuru satrul iman. Cleanliness is half of deen. It's nice words. Innamal amalu binniyah. Your result depends on or your intention. Nice words. But where are they coming from? If they're coming from a ghost, I can take it as most like nice words. I don't know, anonymous. The source is anonymous. But to take it as hadith will make me believe it has a sort of piety attached to it. As I can't say that, so I have to reject it as hadiths. You can say great words, nice words. I have no problem with that. But I've thought that such beautiful words coming from hadiths, but when I dug deeper, I found out most of these hadiths are coming from people who never even existed. I don't have any reason to believe they ever even existed. So what's the point of giving them the standard of hadith narration? I guess we are done for the day. Thank you for joining me. We'll see you next week as usual. Thank you.
Sir.
Register yourself in the meetup. The link is given below.